Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're back with another episode of the InterDrone Podcast, your 30,000-foot view of the commercial drone industry. It is Tuesday, September 1st. My name is CJ Smith, joined today with Michael Pehel, chairman of InterDrone. Our guest today, Randall Warnas. He's the global sUAS segment leader at FLIR. FLIR's been around for almost, 40 or so years now. They design and develop tech solutions to enhance perception and awareness, from helping first responders, military personnel, and to even additional consumer-facing technologies. So really excited to have him on. He's also a perennial InterDrone speaker. Randall, thanks for being here. If you could give the audience just maybe a brief overview about your career, how you landed in the drone industry, and what your job currently entails at FLIR.
Yeah, for sure. So I just passed my 6-year anniversary in the drone industry. Kind of stumbled into it, meeting a couple partners that wanted to start the first drone retail store in the world, which was in Las Vegas, Nevada. We started a company called Drones Plus, and just rapidly expanded during the early adoption of consumer drones. And from there, caught the attention of DJI and the things that we were doing. So they brought me on board, and I started at DJI in October of 2015. They didn't exactly know what to do with me, since they decided to not expand into retail locations, which is what I knew. So instead, I worked with two colleagues and started DJI Enterprise, ran that for a little bit in North America, and then FLIR came knocking, said, come run our global drone business. So I've been at FLIR since early 2017, and I run their global industrial drone business. So we have the government and defense stuff, and then we have the industrial stuff, and I'm all over that, working with first responders, working with utility inspectors, solar inspection, roof inspection, all that stuff.
Right. Cool. All the great enterprise use cases that we at InterDrone are so familiar with. So yeah, great. Excited to have you on today, Randall. We're going to dive into your experience a little bit more in the second half of this podcast. If anyone's tuning in for the first time, we talk about a couple articles from the past week that we feel are particularly interesting, relevant to commercial drones, and then we jump into the interview portion. So the first article I want to touch on today, so Amazon winning FAA approval for prime air drone delivery fleet. This just happened yesterday. The FAA granted them these privileges to fly under the Part 135 framework. Amazon's joining UPS and Alphabet-owned Wing as the two other organizations who previously won FAA approval for these delivery operations. So to either of you, what do you guys make of this news? I mean, when I hear it initially, I kind of think, here we go again. Google, Amazon, the big tech companies seem to be moving forward and winning. I'd like to see some small drone companies kind of be included and in these conversations, but high level thoughts. What do you guys make of this?
So I know that Mike is a much more studious and just overall more articulate person than I am. But I do have one thought, which is that these big companies that are getting these 135s, and it's great, first of all, it's great that we're at least having drones be taken seriously somewhere where there is going to be large change and large deployments of drone technology. Whether the beneficiaries of that are the drone diehards that we see every day, or in our passings, in our networks, I don't know. But that's really what could be interesting, is now when these companies realize, hey, I need a software stack and I don't want to go build it ourselves, maybe we should reach out to drone company, venture capitalist funded drone company, and maybe we should acquire them, or maybe we should be investing in them. We could see investment come into the known players within the drone industry because of these things. Just because right now it's big company and internalized doesn't mean that they're not going to find that they need other assets, and those assets will be the ones that our friends have been building and driving forward for the last 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Yeah, I guess there's two sides to that, especially if you're looking at delivery and what these Part 135s are. You need a company of a certain scale to actually execute it at a reliability level that the FAA will tolerate, right? So it does seem a little bit like with Part 135, the FAA got its out for having to open the field too wide, where then the concerns are they wouldn't be actually able to enforce the following the rule. Mm-hmm. So I think the other thing is, though, Randall's point on it brings exposure to the entire industry. Just because Amazon, Google, or big players that you already know, UPS, seem like they're just able to claim huge swaths of land that a lot of smaller companies were able to, or were trying to gain ground on early. The questions become why didn't they get funding? Why didn't they get interest from Google? Why didn't they get interest from other bigger players to kind of push themselves upwards anyway? And ultimately, this exposure just broadens the ecosystem. So if Amazon actually is able to successfully, scale up a delivery drone program, there's questions as to whether or not they just do these things for headlines, because the last time we didn't get anywhere, right? And they had a lull in even where they're positioned in the market, and in anybody's interest in what Amazon's drone program was doing in the drone kind of inner circles. There's going to be just like, having a Mercedes Benz, you don't realize all of the little subcontractors that go into repairs, into, the computers, into all of the parts, that will help spring up those kind of businesses for the drone market if these things eventually do become successful with Wing, UPS, and Amazon.
Right. So maybe we're able to follow these companies and get to where we want to go faster.
You need money. We don't have enough money in the industry, and
Yeah,
I think
and
anytime a big player throws money, it helps us.
Yeah. And I mean, it would have been too soon if these things happened 2-3 years ago. And regulation mostly is the thing that's hindering these things to really move forward. But we see what Intel did with their drone program. They buy Ascending Technologies, they invest 50 million or so in Unique. They think that drones are going to do something at that point and grow to a level at that point that it just really wasn't feasible, knowing, us sitting in the drone industry every day, knowing what's possible. But now these companies that are going to be doing mass deployments and basically lobbying to the federal government to keep this technology alive, to invest in infrastructure, to support it. I mean, that's what we all need as an industry, is for these big players to come in and make it so that we can secure longevity for the industry, and we can develop technology that we know will be available and sellable in 3 years, 5 years from now. And it's been a tough sledding over the past few years, where we've seen consolidation. We've expected more consolidation, and that's because these type of big players aren't buying or needing drone technology or backing up the industry when it comes to lobbying and things like that.
Yeah, that was exactly going to be my next point in our question, is that, what types of power do these companies have when it comes to lobbying, when it comes to trying to push some regulation through? I think you get the attention of regulators in a much different way if you are Amazon or Google, and you want to get something done or want to get something passed. And they probably look at the data that these companies are providing just through a different lens than maybe a smaller company. And these companies can get larger quantities of data and really, try to make their case.
Yeah, the other thing, though, is just the caution is that sometimes the tech companies just want to sound like they're on the edge of something rather than actually delivering on that technology. And I think the last 5 years in general in technology has felt that way. Whereas if you went the previous 5 years, it felt like everything was exploding because of, essentially the iPhone creating a mobile interface for mobile computing that really kind of just opened the door for us to rethink the way we construct applications. Whereas this is kind of like the failure of IoT, self-driving cars, all this stuff has not materialized at the level that it was expected to. So, ironically, I think drones have been so successful in actually making good products, but they haven't had like the same foothold because the technology is not as approachable as a smartphone is.
I think it's interesting what you're saying about not delivering and working for a publicly traded company. I started to realize, and this is for the first time really in my life I've worked for a publicly traded company, but I've realized like what sets off investors. And so if you're Amazon or if you're Google, the last thing you want to do is upset your investors. So saying that you're going to do something big and also, not only is drone package delivery big, but it's also controversial. For them to do that, I don't think it's to the benefit of their investors. I think that if they didn't really think they could deliver, they wouldn't make an announcement like that. It's not like Amazon needs a marketing bump. It's not like they need this news story to be successful. Amazon's probably had one of the best years ever because of COVID.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
not like they're desperate. You know, a
Mhm.
desperate company does something like that. These guys are probably like, now's the time to say that we've been working on this stuff in the background for all this time. Now's the time that we have to go public and get this FAA approval, or we've collected enough data where we feel comfortable we can ask for it, and that we'll actually get it. So it's very, I think for a publicly traded company, it's a very meticulous process that goes all the way up to the C-suite to get approved to do this kind of stuff. And drones are pretty revolutionary and controversial. And so I
Right.
think big ups to them for having the cojones to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it does kind of affect the whole industry and the little guy, and especially domestically here in the United States. So
Yeah.
I want to jump into our second article. So the Pentagon releases the list of 5 government-approved drones, culminating 18 months of research and testing. So most of us have heard in the past few weeks concerns over data security for foreign drones, and an amendment which actually bans the use of foreign drones at federal agencies. So the DoD and the DIU, Defense Innovations Unit, they were testing drones, and they came out with 5 that they're approving for federal government use: the Altavian M440 Ion, the Parrots Anafi, Skydios X2, Teal Drones Golden Eagle, and the Vantage Robotics Vesper. So 4 out of these are U.S. based, which doesn't come as a surprise, and calling them Blue UAS. So it's basically a stamp of approval that different aircraft will receive from the DoD and DIU. What do you guys think about the 5 selections made? And just for the record, this amendment, it doesn't ban the use of foreign drones from state or local governments. This is only for federal. But what do you guys think about the 5 aircraft the DIU and DoD approved? And I mean, 2 of them actually use FLIR modules as well.
All of them use FLIR modules.
Oh, they do?
Actually.
Okay,
So, I mean, I think that I've been uniquely positioned in this whole process in the SRR program, which these airframes were developed for, when DIU said, hey, we need to have some domestic technology that is capable of doing the same thing as a Mavic 2, which is basically what it was. We want to have this, but we want to be able to own it without the cybersecurity concerns. They basically set forward, I think, a baker's dozen of drone manufacturers to attempt doing this, and then slowly whittled that down. So that 18-month process was from the first prototypes that were put forward in front of DIU through the testing phases to now. And I think that Blue UAS is kind of like a consolation prize for the people that aren't winning the big tranche of DIU SRR, the SRR program. Right now, Parrot and Skydio are the 2 that are left in that program, and the other 3 had viable airframes that I think the government were like, yeah, keep building stuff, and if we want to buy it, we'll buy it. If you keep, if you have some fantastic features that you put in later, we want to buy it. Or if one of these companies decide to do something different or go off the rails, we have backup plans. I mean, it all makes sense. The US government didn't have to invest much more to get a much broader amount of options for their purchases. But if you look at all 5 of those airframes, they look pretty much the same. They all have 320 thermal sensors with 12 megapixel visible light cameras. They have 30 minutes flight time, and that's by design. What's cool about that is that now all of those companies are taking something that the government really, the federal government really pushed for, and now we're commercializing it. So we have a whole group of airframes that are really interesting for the commercial applications. And when InterDrone happens in person this year in December, or doesn't, we'll have a lot of things to look at and talk about that we really didn't have pre 2020.
I think this will open up, especially in the public safety sector, the confidence to purchase drones again, because there's been kind of a soft winter wind blowing over that, as people anxiety is built about whether or not the government would allow public safety agencies to actually utilize DJI drones. So if that's a concern, if that really is the thing that's holding you up from like advancing your drone program, you now have options. Those options are stamped by the federal government, and you can move forward with confidence. I'm not surprised at the two that are still kind of in the running there, Skydio and Parrot. I mean, Parrot for two reasons. For the reason of the fact that they have an established manufacturing base, they could probably produce at scale faster, and they're riding on top of the PX4 open source code, which has also been accepted by the DIU. And then Skydio, because they have amazing software engineers and they produced probably the best as far as intelligent computer vision system for sense and avoid. But there are scale issues with Skydio still. I see that they're producing batches still, which I mean, I was a little kind of concerned because I thought that we had kind of put the past behind us and that this was just but they're one step at a time, I guess, right?
Yeah, and Skydio getting $100 million of investment,
It's gonna help.
you would assume that it will help. Parrot already is well funded, self-funded, and they have a lot of assets, and I think that that's really interesting for a military/commercial product. Is that if you can take the Parrot Anafi or the Anafi USA that's in the SRR program, and then you can start putting in things for photogrammetry with Pix4D, or you could translate some of the buyers into SenseFly buyers, or you could add multispectral cameras to it for other mission sets with MicaSense. They all own all of those assets.
Established ecosystem, yeah.
Right. And so how long will it take for Skydio to realize that that entire ecosystem is what people want? Now you have a really smart drone, but you don't have your own payloads. Now you have a really smart drone, but you don't have your own software stack. And do they go pick a winner and use some of that 100 million? It's not going to get them very far to buy big players, but do they use that 100 million for those sorts of things? Do they try to be an end-to-end solution? Do they try to be like a DJI and compete against their former partners? We don't really know what the next chapter of the drone industry looks like, but I think that there's more stories to tell. It's like Game of Thrones season 5 was really good. It's like not until you get to 7 that it actually falls apart.
Yeah. Oh, let's hope we don't get to that Daenerys moment.
Yeah, we're like, that's it.
That's where we were going.
Like literal, how many episodes? There's like 90 hours of material. I just watched 90 hours.
Almost a decade of your life. Yeah. It's a poor investment, but
spin a wheel, right? And who's going to be the winner? Which brings us to another point, which is the only thing that's scary about moving away from DJI is who's the clear winner. We could talk about Skydio, but they're having ramp up issues. We could talk about Parrot, but they're French. We could talk about, that none of the other three.
Why is being French bad?
It's not a problem. It's just
as a French person, as
a fellow French person, I think that
I knew there was something I liked about you.
I didn't know that we didn't talk about that before, but I'm a dual French-American citizen. But I think that when we look at DJI as an enemy, they created this entire system in which companies like FLIR can build payloads off of and actually have ROI.
Yeah.
If I'm building a payload for tomorrow, I'm looking at DJI with potential bans. I'm looking at Skydio with potential production problems. I'm looking at Parrot with, their mines are scattered all over, and they already have a full ecosystem and they're trying to move up that ladder. So who do you pick?
Yeah.
Who is the winner in this market? And when all horses are the same, it makes it for a big gamble. It's really nice when there's a clear, front runner.
Well, nice for you, but I think for me it's more interesting again. Like when DJI became the sole answer to everything, like I just felt like a lot stopped. It's hard to run even a drone event if there's a less diverse ecosystem, right? So and also I think there's great innovation that comes out of that competition. So I'm actually excited again that they all seem to have, it's like the three warring houses. They all seem to have some foot to claim a piece of that future.
I think that there's an American thing, which we want a ton of choices, right? Like you go to the grocery store and you have an entire aisle of cereals.
Yeah, just try to order eggs.
And then, exactly. But then you go to Europe or something and it's like you get either like Cheerios or
Yeah,
a
the chef
frosted flakes.
decided what you get.
Like,
You get this meal. You don't ask for anything else.
exactly. So like
Yeah.
I think that we have this paradox of choice. And for an American, it's like I want to be able to choose. But what I've seen is that it creates a lag in decision making. Now that there's not this front runner. DJI before the cybersecurity concerns, it was like, of course, I have a DJI. What the hell do you like? What else would I have? And then there was like the anti-DJIers that would buy like an Autel, and you'd be like, why? Like, well, it's the same thing. Like, but now that there's this amount of choice, they're going to have to go back and be like, what really is the best technology? Does your software work on my airframe? Oh no, the teal golden eagle isn't compatible with drone deploy. Well, I'm not going to use that. So now I have to go to the next and the next and the next, and you're going to bump into so many instances where your stuff doesn't do what you think it would do. It's not
Right.
DJI. DJI literally was compatible with everything, and that is what was amazing about trade shows like InterDrone, is that you'd walk around and there were people trying to get market share for sure, but then everything else was like, yeah, we're using a Phantom 4, we're using an Inspire 2, and it's like you didn't have to guess which airframe was going to actually do what you wanted it to do.
I remember a lot of companies, like, for example, a drone in a box company, I forget the name of it, but like they pivoted at some point to like, yeah, we're making our own airframe, but also our technology works with DJI. Like that was a moment when you realized that even the companies in the space were saying, okay, what's my real value proposition?
Yeah.
And, if DJI is the iPhone, then I want to be, the camera you attached for high fidelity.
Right.
I want to be, the expensive headphones. I don't want to try and go up against that because I'll get squashed. But we haven't had a true Android yet, and I'm not sure if it's Parrot or if it's Skydio or if it's the entire PX4 ecosystem. But if you look at those early Android phones, I laugh because I think it was 2016 when Material Design came out for Android, and that was like saying like, yeah, we actually care how these things look all of a sudden. So like imagine going that far into app development and like, yeah, we should care about how the product looks. And I think we're actually starting to see that in the PX4 ecosystem and drones that are built on top of that. You're starting to actually see quality that like just feels good.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, and it's been a long battle, and it'll be more, I think. But like I think if anything, the paranoia that was thrown into the market, if it has some good effect, it'll be that it kind of evened the playing field from a total like skyrocket atmospheric escape for DJI.
Yeah, I wonder if DJI was that Android and every gimbal, every camera, every sensor all fit with it. If then you had these other manufacturers that aren't trying to be an Android, because that was, that niche was already completely dominated by DJI. So now I wonder if you do see Skydio, Parrot start to create a similar aircraft to what DJI was doing, where it is more integratable with a lot of these other, product.
Yeah, fully open.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
For a long time,
rumors.
Chris Anderson from 3D Art would say that the one of the biggest pivots that DJI made, or moves DJI made that hurt him particularly, is creating an SDK. Once they created that open interface, it was game over. And SDKs are a pain in the butt to maintain, and you need people, and you need development, and you need time. And so for anyone to catch up, it seems like $100 million to Skydio was like, whoa, that's a big check. That check can get burned really, really.
Well, especially if they're hiring American or European engineers.
100%.
Right.
So, I mean, I think if you look at companies like, you say Parrot, people think toys. You say Skydio, people think can't scale, can't deliver, can't produce. You say DJI, and all you say is Chinese. Like that comes to is this a part of the current administration? Is this part of an American xenophobia of not looking outside of the United States, even when the technology is better? Is this American sensationalism that we think we can do everything the best? When you have 14,000 people employed just for drone technology, a 150-person company being the second place isn't going to come close. And me being part of that mothership saw it firsthand, how quickly they can put more people than most drone companies have in their entire payroll on one project.
On one new, yeah.
Right, and that was another thing that hit 3DR that maybe hasn't come out, is just the affordability of the labor at DJI means you get more hands on a project, more inefficient hands even, right? So like you could have the top people in China, or you could have 4 decent people in China, and one great person versus 4 decent people. You'll get the same output. So that's what we're dealing with here, is they don't have to, they could get an equivalent engineer for basically a quarter of the price,
Maybe even less than that.
yeah. And we found out that their engineering team wasn't as big as we would have assumed on a previous podcast. So that imagine if they actually committed bodies to it and really, really wanted to, like, just overspend on over engineering.
Right.
And they've done a great job even without that.
I think that us 3, we could say we're all pretty good at our jobs, but if we had more time, we'd be even better. Well, when you're talking about 4x the number of people, you have 4x the amount of time, and China works long hours. The expectation at DJI is to work long hours. So you have time, you have ideas, you have 4 people that are all saying something different, and you're melding that into, refining one another.
Yeah,
so
checking each other.
One
Yeah.
engineer, when Skydio or Parrot says, we want to create a new ESC board, or have the ESCs be optimized, when you have 4 people doing that, or maybe 8 people doing that, just that, you're going to get a better outcome regardless of how brilliant they are.
Right.
I mean,
bug testing, finding errors, correcting things. That myth has been dispelled of, like, the great genius in tech a long time ago. Do you know why they do so many contests and hackathons and things like that? Because no matter how good you have your engineering team at Intel, at Google, whatever, you actually get better results by pulling outside sources. Even if they don't develop a fully baked answer, you could then take all the problems they found to your internal team of geniuses and refine it and actually come out with a product.
You're coming at something with fresh eyes, right? Sometimes you're too immersed in the problem, and you can't take a step back and get that high level view and look at things from a new perspective.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say on this from my end is that it should be known to the people listening. I used to work at DJI, but I also left. 1. 2, DJI used to be a very tight partner with FLIR, and then they put out their own thermal payload used in a Chinese core. So it's not like I'm a DJI fanboy. DJI has burned me multiple times, and I'm very open with DJI and others about those burns. However, is DJI such a bad thing? I sure liked the days that, money was flowing in this industry and there wasn't so much second guessing. I liked those days.
Right.
It
Confidence.
was good. It was good for me, and it was good for the business that I was behind, and it was good for the people that were using the technology, because nobody flew a DJI airframe and said, this technology sucks. Nobody. Nobody. There were issues, but those issues, like you're talking about, bug fixes and stuff, yeah, like, wait, look what happened with GoPro. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a US-based company or not. There's going to be issues.
That goes to the scale thing. If you're not reaching the scale, you're actually not finding the problems. So I think that actually speaks to Skydio's biggest issue. And also, the coolest thing about them is that they've actually been pretty well-to-do to actually overcome a lack of that scale as far as producing a quality product. I find it interesting. I think that's why they do kind of feel magical when you talk about them. It's like, yeah, okay.
I agree. No, I agree. I said publicly about a year and a half ago, if there was, if this were a horse race, I'd bet on Skydio winning. They seem like a winning horse. However, the production issues are troublesome, and the airframe is no longer the important part of the stack.
Right. Yeah.
And we've been talking about that for years.
We've been talking about that before Skydio was a name on our tongues, right?
100%. Yeah. It's just the vehicle that carries something. That something, payload, will become a GoPro, like GoPro 5, where why get a 6 if you have a 5? So the payloads will be at some point, static. Then it's software, AI and machine learning, and all of those things are going to come into play in a much bigger way. But no one wants to invest in something that's not making any money, and they certainly don't want to build it for a DJI airframe, a Skydio airframe, the PX4 stack in general. Parrot decides they want to own their own ecosystem, so they're going to branch off and create their own SDK. I mean, Nobody wants to build it 100 times, and nobody sells more airframes than DJI, and that is the problem. That is why we can't scale. That is why Amazon and Google making a big announcement is great. Because if there's 20,000 units out in the world of a Google airframe or Amazon airframe, someone needs to build their smarts. And that's an addressable market. DJI has an addressable market. The rest, it's like, you tell me I can build for a 500, 1,000 units a year, forget it. I'm going to go look somewhere else. That's the world we live in now.
Right, and then they try to make it seem like you want to pay $10,000 per unit just because we do this one specific thing for this X industry. It's just not going to fly, literally. The best part about the drone industry is the puns.
Is the puns?
It's absolutely the worst part, Mike. It's the worst part of the drone industry.
Them,
Yeah.
Yeah. You walk into them, huh?
Yeah.
Honestly,
I could have flown into like a bird into a window. Okay.
Well, let's move on a little bit. I know we're going to come back to this, come back to kind of DJI with regards to your experience, Randall, and but I want to talk about real quick this headline that came out of CNN's airline pilots worried about their jobs, so some are learning to fly drones. Is this a valid concern for pilots, just from your guys' thoughts? And then do these skill sets translate? If I can fly a 747, am I going to be a great drone pilot?
Well, I don't think knowledge of airspace is a detriment, but I think it's kind of been shown that you don't need to be a pilot first as long as you have respect for that airspace. So hey, if they're into aviation and they're concerned about their job, it doesn't hurt to pick up a new hobby. I would say this might not be where all the money is, because being a DSP is a rough business. You really have to be committed. You have to log those flight hours in. You have to show that record. You have to find a client base. You have to work for a company, maybe even, or get into a company that has a drone program. All of those things will take a lot more time than I think a current commercial pilot is contemplating if they think they're going to get into drones.
Ready to commit, yeah.
Bob Mader of Union Pacific Railroad he's the head of some big aerospace training thing. I can't say what it is, but he's like the president of some consortium or some board or whatever. And Union Pacific has a big drone program, and I was working with them while I was at DJI, and their requirements list was long. They wanted it to do everything and be super safe and all of these things, which is what we all want. However, we have the technology we have today. So the only concern I have with that is when pilots expect it to have an answer for every question, we just don't have that. To the DJI point and the others, DJI doesn't have the answers for one reason, because they're on the other side of the planet and their developers are not going to be able to get you. I mean, the quality expectation of things produced in China is different. So DJI is kind of changing that by being more forward thinking, but they don't cover all the bases. And then you have the other side, which they just don't have the people or time to address your, standards and those kind of issues.
Not to go too deeply into DJI again, but one of the interesting things was what I brought up on your podcast, is that they're like a Toyota, like a Toyota sedan. It makes it hard for them to even, especially if you use the Apple analogy, to even want to dive in too niche into how they develop their products.
Right.
So even when they make a beast, it's like the trash can Mac of drones. It's got everything that you'll never need, but you can do it. So, but it's not finely tuned for a specific industry use case. So
correct. And it's all because it's all measured on ROI. What is our addressable market? If I make something just for solar inspection, that market's pretty damn small. But if I can take that solar inspection thing and also sell it to police officers and oil and gas companies, that's how they think. And I think that you're right. Like a flyability, making a drone in a ball that flies confined space missions, like you're not going to scale to the level of double-digit percentage market share in the drone industry. And as long as you're okay with that, you'll make some money. But you have to be super careful with how much you're spending, and you have to have an idea that DJI can't take in 6 months.
Well, I never bet against the Swiss, and I believe they're Swiss, right?
But there's a lot of Swiss drone companies.
Yeah, but they're all making amazing drones, like the Wingtra. You know, like, I mean, when you, even if they don't have a use case, watching those things fly. I've seen some drones when I was in Switzerland. I'm like, why would you need that? But like, they figured out how to make something that shouldn't fly, just like do ballets in the air. So.
But I can't look away.
Yeah.
Right.
Randall, I want to talk a little bit about your career. So you mentioned starting Drones Plus, selling consumer drones out of a brick and mortar storefront in Las Vegas, and then moving to DJI enterprise sector. Those seem like completely opposite ends of the spectrum. How did kind of that happen, and what were just some of the experiences you had along the way from really kind of seeing two completely different sides of the drone industry?
Yeah, I'll try to make the first part of this really brief, which is I was waiting to go to officer candidate school for the United States Navy to do intelligence for military intelligence, and I just finished grad school. I was waiting for something to do. I meet some guys that want to start this drone company, and I had nothing better going on, so we started it.
Nice.
I left and went to officer candidate school. I had a top secret security clearance at the time, and I dropped out because it wasn't that fun, and what I was doing was really exciting, and I was like, that's not the life I want. So I go back and open up 15 locations from Honolulu to Miami, two in Canada. We basically did a land grab in the early days of selling drone technology when there was a big market and not a lot of people that were able to put one in your hands.
Mhm.
So it was like super exciting times, right? Then DJI says basically like we don't know the US market. We don't have a lot of people there. And we see what you're doing in selling drone technology. We grew to a double-digit million-dollar company in the drone industry in 2014, 15 in the early days. And
Awesome.
I would say it was quite impressive. And
Yeah.
at that time, I could say I've hired more people that sell drone technology than anyone on the planet. And so they're like, okay, we want you to do that. So I just opened up our 14th location in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have an interview with DJI, and they're like, yeah, like right after the interview, it's really strange. They're just like, we want you to be a part of our team. Usually, like that's not typical. Usually, there's a long waiting process, but they were
Right.
ready to go. And I remember thinking like, well, shit, my life just changed a lot. Like they're like, we want you to be in China in a week, and we're going to be here for a month. And I'm like, I guess that's awesome.
Yeah. Did you know right away you were going to take it, or was there any time?
100%,
Yeah.
100%. It's the mothership, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think most
Especially
people,
back then.
Even if it's a 3-month tour,
100%.
you got to see the inside,
Most people dream of like that mothership experience. Like, what is DJI? When people were losing jobs or just trying to move within the industry, while I was at DJI, I would see a lot of familiar names come across people's desks of possible interviewees for different positions, and or would get asked the question like, "What's it like working for DJI?" And the response to that is, "It's hard." DJI is not a company that treats you like you have emotions or feelings. They treat you as someone that can give them output. And
Right.
it's
Right. It's a
great for
system.
exactly. It's great for business. It's like this revolving door of brilliant people that come in and they're like, "Oh, that didn't feel that good." And if Frank's listening, change the way you treat your people, man, because you have really good people and you keep letting them go. They keep having these mass exodus of great DJI employees leaving because it just doesn't feel comfortable as a Westerner, especially to work for a company that doesn't know how to say thank you for busting your ass and leaving
Mm.
your families and traveling around. And
Yeah, but isn't the work thanks enough? Like
that's exactly the mentality, right? So
Right. Right.
the work-life balance goes away, especially living in the US and working for DJI, is that you wake up at 7 in the morning, you get to the office, you work until 6, you get home at 7:30. I was living in LA, so sometimes it'd be 8 with traffic, and DJI, the people in China are just waking up and they want to talk to you until 1 in the morning.
Right.
And it's rinse and repeat. And when you do that, I was only there for a year and a half. I put my fingerprints all over that stuff. Like I've been gone for almost 4 years, and I still like new people are like, "Oh, I've heard about stuff you did," and I'm like, "Great." Because I actually cared about people. I actually
Mm.
cared about the users. I actually cared about our reseller network, which is super important. And I think that the missteps DJI took is when they had the Department of Interior reach out an olive branch before they needed them. They should have taken it, but they waited until people were hounding them about cybersecurity, and then they're like, oh, by the way, do this like review of our technology and say it's too late. They had a thing called the DAN, which not a lot of people know about because it didn't last long, but it's the Drone Advisory Network. And DJI was reaching out to people that they knew had big names and were using their technology. So FLIR was approached as well. And they're like, how would you feel about us using your name in documents to, talk to senators and stuff like that? And it was at the time an uncomfortable thing because they were already called out. But if they had built that a year before, and they had people saying like, yeah, we're using DJI technology and we're super stoked about it because we were making money then, it would have happened. But they waited, and that's a mistake. That's Frank's the CEO of DJI's mistake, is that he loves the technology. He considers himself the Steve Jobs of the drone industry, but
Well,
he
I'd
does
say he
not
is.
have,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But he's also, to his detriment, the Chinese Steve Jobs of the drone industry, and he has all that hair that sticks to that. And this isn't against Chinese people. It's not even against China. It's just he has some obstacles he has to address. And if he were a public-facing CEO that would come out and be like, "Hey guys, I'm kissing babies and hugging, the elderly," people would feel different about DJI than this mysterious dude that locks himself up on the 17th floor of the DJI building and never talks to anybody, including his employees, and tells them that they're all replaceable. No joke.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely interesting behind the curtain kind of look on things. But so to me, I hear kind of like what seems like group selection operating against that, though. So like, what is good for an individual company and process to what's good for business for their bottom line? It seems it's very effective for DJI until it butts up against the broader environment, where basically as a group the rest of the drone industry was very willing to attack them and hop on the Chinese paranoia, right?
Yeah.
Let's face it, that only got as much legs as it got because of basically that winners take all mentality put them on an island to themselves. And I mean, I remember drone companies that had, they're like 95% Chinese parts manufacturing, like making the case against DJI. And you're like, do you not see where that is going?
Right.
Because they were just so desperate to gain ground, right? So I think that might have been a factor in it. But like again, the three houses kind of analogy, I would never count them out. I think they're in it for the long haul, and there's something to that kind of brutal cynicism. It tends to win out more than we want it to.
Right. And I think the last point I'll make on that is that it's really interesting to look at the people that are left there, like Brendan Schulman, like Romeo Dersher. They're probably the only two names left that work for DJI that people know and people have seen and people have interacted with. Oh, and also Chief Wayne Baker, but he's a later comer to that. They're the people holding the torch for DJI in this country. Other than that,
Romeo is a public face.
100%.
I mean, and what a great public face to have. Like he's one of the most like amiable, like forward-thinking people. Like I don't know.
Right.
It's just
So now, if DJI is paying attention and they realize that their amiable face is gone, they realize their policy guy is gone, and they realize that the former chief of the Joshua Fire Department, which Chief Baker, I love you, but you're probably the less in this equation. But they have those guys leave. And then they say, well, how was your experience with DJI? And they're like, well, there's weird stuff. I was there a long time, saw a lot of weird stuff. I just don't feel comfortable there anymore. How are they going to attract talent in this country going forward? I don't know. I mean, that the dream of working for DJI is kind of diminishing, and it has, there's a tarnish that you feel when you work there, and being an employee there is just not as easy for domestic U.S. sales or domestic interactions with them.
I mean, is there a future where DJI just doesn't care about the U.S. market? Is
100%.
that even possible? Yeah,
that's where it's going.
I feel it might. Yeah, I do kind of get that kind of sense that might be a thing in the future. Just because, I mean, I don't know if you saw the drone ban, but that from China. So the trade war is here, my friends. Like, it's no longer kind of this cold trade war. That is a full on like, yeah, you don't want our stuff, we don't want to give you any of it. You know, like, oh yeah, here are all the things we didn't want, you didn't even think you wanted, but we're shutting those off too.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see how. I mean, if that incentivizes, I think if the U.S. is going down this route, they've thrown some money into the bin, but I want to see more. Like, if you're really going to commit to shutting off like that, you got to really do it.
Well,
You know?
I wanted to bring that point up earlier because it's only federal agencies. So, you know, what does that trickle down look like? What types of kind of confusing positions does that put local authorities, local public safety organizations, police departments? I mean, you know, I think they're obviously looking at the ban, so they're skeptical to begin with. Then again, especially if they were already using a DJI aircraft, or do they continue to use it? And then what kind of like data, you know, is their data then, you know, quote, compromised from other people that may want to use it or look at it or learn from it?
I think more interesting than that is international corporations. What does it mean for them and what choices they make? Because if you're a U.S. corporation, it makes it easier. Like, all right, we're not going with DJI because I don't ever want to face a future where my drone program and my multi-million-dollar investment is just shut off.
Yeah.
But if you're international, now you're like, well, okay, this region is going to be using that region locked drone, and this region is going to be using that region locked drone. Now I got to get these two systems that don't want to communicate with each other to communicate. It becomes a complication for them.
Yeah. And if they're not using DJI, they hit up any of these blue UAS companies and say, I want to use you. And then they're like, well, we can give you like 200 units a year. They're like, no, like we need more, right? Like, not to belabor the point, but when the drone industry turned on DJI, I don't think they fully thought it through that there's no one else, and everyone you dream of can't make you the money you need to make to keep your staff employed. It just doesn't exist yet. We slowed down the industry when we turned on DJI because every drone user, every drone industry person dreams of a day that drones are like ubiquitous, and it's like, yeah, everyone has them, every industry is using them. But when you started ripping drones out of their programs and started shutting them down and, you know, letting them collect dust on shelves because of
momentum.
phobia,
Right.
it for sure, that's what
Right.
we're eating right now, is the lack of momentum in this industry. And everyone's like, what do I bet on? What can I build that I know is going to actually work? And it's tough.
Right.
Yeah,
And just the bad news, the bad press. I mean, any agency that was considering a drone program is going to be way more reluctant to do so now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and you've also fed into the paranoia that the drone is spying on you in general, right? Which
100%.
Yeah.
right, 'cause
Yeah.
that
Right. Even though it's a different type of spying, it's still spying in the headlines already.
and you could walk on a city block and you don't even know how many cameras passed you. You know, like let alone the noisy one in the sky. But
For sure, man. And I was reading that third article about the pilots, the airline pilots, and at the bottom it said something like 50% of Americans feel like drones shouldn't be able to fly near households. It's like, so I can take my point and shoot. I could take my point and shoot with a Canon with a, you know, super zoom lens and like be able to look in windows, but you're worried about that? Like,
yeah, and Google mapped the outside of your house from space and the ground.
right.
Right.
So like you're already covered. You know what I mean? But there is, and I do appreciate though the kind of near field, the noisiness, the kind of instinctive lower brain reaction to something in the sky that you have no control over. Like I totally get that, but I think we've done a terrible job as an industry, and feeding into this narrative was part of that, of dismissing paranoia with facts and good experiences. We leaned into the dark side here to bad results, I think.
And for a long time, the industry was DJI, and it was the voice of DJI was Brendan Schulman, and he was working it on a policy standpoint. But DJI has so much marketing dollars that they were putting into sponsoring the Red Bull car races in Germany rather than marketing to the people and saying this technology is working and here's a bunch of education behind it. Like, they didn't help at all. Romeo Dersher does 7 presentations at InterDrone every year, right? Something like that.
He did that part 1 year.
It's not a criticism of InterDrone. It's just like
2 people canceled. There was a hurricane. Anyway,
he's seen the opportunity to educate, but he's educating people that already know. What about getting into, the finance teams and legal teams of corporations? How does that happen? That was what I was trying to do when I was there. We did a visit at Tesoro, and we're like, bring everybody and anybody that wants to ask questions about drones. We'll be here for 2 hours, and we were in like their main lobby area next to their cafeteria. And so during 2 hours of their lunchtime, people were coming and saying, all right, so what are these? And it was everybody in that organization, not just the drone fanatics. And
all
that
the stakeholders, yeah.
you need to have money to do that. That's the problem. Is you need to have ROI. Skydio sitting in a meeting and they're like, we're going to go to Tesoro. They'll be like, why? How many drones are you going to sell?
Right.
But DJI has that opportunity with the money that they make, but they're using it for other things. And that we all felt the negative impact of that.
Yeah, you can't use the money that people invested in you. If I invest money in your company, I'm expecting a return on my investment. I don't want you just to spend that money marketing kind of the industry. But we've talked about this podcast several times that the industry almost needs its own marketing plan, marketing strategy to kind of, right. And, it's not Skydio marketing Skydio products. It's literally the FAA marketing drone technology to the citizens of this country almost. And it's not necessarily marketing it like everyone needs to be on board and buy it, but just dispel myths, create transparency, just create a little bit of trust, because there's so many, it just seems, bad news goes farther than good news most of the time. And we're seeing that.
There's like a factor here where, because you're reminding me, CJ, there's a factor here where there's just not enough money in the small UAS sector, right? But that's why so much attention has gone to UAM. But for all the money and all the power that UAM has to actually kind of push forward some things like UTM further and faster, the selling point to the average human is like, wait, you mean rich people could skip traffic while I still suffer?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to get people on? And it's noisy? I don't know about that. I just don't see how you could get people on board with that. And I think there's also a lack of understanding of history. Like if you go and look back at, helicopter use in just New York City, they were planning to expand rides to the airport from the Wall Street sector. And ultimately they scaled it up about halfway to where they thought they were going to get it. And then it got shut back down to, the kind of current volume, because the amount of noise was obstructive, right? So even with the electric motors, if you reduce it, it's still like there's so much fantastical kind of stuff put into the UAM thing. And it's kind of just disheartening sometimes, because like small UAS is here, it's real, it provides value, but it's just, and part of the problem is it cuts out costs that would be elsewhere. So it doesn't make as much for that value, but like it deserves to move forward and be accepted and actually be successful.
Yeah, and I talked earlier about the number of people DJI can throw at a problem. If you imagine the number of people they could throw at marketing to the industry, even a small team for them marketing to the industry, they could do some work. But if you boys and me, so us three, we could go start off a marketing consulting company, and we have every drone manufacturer give us like 150 grand a piece, and then we just take that money and we just talk about the industry. Then when CNN wants to have a drone expert on their panel, it's not the guy that knows somebody that lives down the street from him that he brings on, and you're like, who the hell is that guy? Drone expert,
right.
Let's filter that. Let's have the drone industry have like someone or like a group that people look to, because it would have been CEOs of the drone manufacturers, but DJI CEO is silent, right? Like that's who you would have picked if you could choose someone to interview. And we just haven't had that. Chris Anderson is the closest thing we've ever had to a public facing CEO, or maybe Intel CEO, which I can't remember his name, but I think I don't know. Chris Anderson was the closest. And yeah, there were other issues there. Exactly. And I love that guy. I think he's brilliant. I think that he has much to offer the industry, but he's doing it with his own platform, and not everyone's buying.
Well, Chris is working on type certifications now. I think that's important. But like, Romeo has said that. Like, think about that. So Romeo works for the competitor. He had said like, something is lost in the spirit once Chris kind of exited from the public stage portion of the industry. And he wanted to see people as inspiring like that again. I said, Romeo, like, it's you. You're that
Right.
you're that person who's left. There isn't another person like that's gonna crop up out of nowhere. Like what Adam Bree is doing at Skydio is great. But he's an engineer first. He's
Right.
not
For sure.
Mr. Presentation, and he doesn't have to be. I mean, he could focus on building a big product. It's not just because you're a successful drone company CEO that means it's required of you to do that job. That was something that Chris just did because of his history and who he was, that he was trained and molded to be able to do that,
Right.
And he was an editor-in-chief at Wired. So I mean, he knows how to kind of communicate a point and too.
And maybe that, replicating the DJI model of the head of the companies not being someone that wants to be public facing. Let's talk to Adam. Let's talk to Tobin. Let's talk to George. Let's talk to Henri. All the guys that are part of this Blue UAS crew, be public facing. You can engineer the hell out of your product, but if people don't know you, they won't like you. Period.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we've been CJ will tell you, just establishing relationships in the industry, just actually having more communication with our audience. And actually, our list is growing so much faster since we started doing the podcast in this new format, talking about articles, inviting people like you to talk more casually, less restricted.
Wait, this is casual?
Yeah.
I can't wait till we turn the camera off.
Right. But it puts a face to what InterDrone is in a way that a marketing email never can,
The reason that Michael Chasen became what he was is not because of Precision Hawk, the brand, nor the money they made. It was because if you went to a trade show and you walked in the Precision Hawk booth, Michael Chasen was there. If you walked into InterDrone and you were looking who the keynote speaker was, it was Michael Chasen. So how did a guy that went from Blackboard to sitting at the top of the drone advisory committee for the FAA happen in 2 years? It's because he was public facing. AF.
A little insider secret, that conversation with Dan Elwell happened because they shared the stage. Right. They were literally one after the other. And, months later, Dan's thinking who would be good, Like he met a couple people at InterDrone, but who did he have the most FaceTime with before he was whisked away onto a plane? It was Michael. And it makes a difference. You have to be out there, and for all the crap that Michael got and some of the kind of the management stuff, that's who cares? Precision Hawk is still here. They were good for the drone industry's growth. Not everybody succeeds with every plan, right? He was super important for, again, carrying the torch. And, again, for all the insider talk about Precision Hawk, you know what video has like the most views out of all our keynotes? It's Michael's, But if you ask the Drone Insider, like, oh, that was the worst keynote of the bunch, because they're more interested in something like Michael Blades talking, or it's something more in depth, like when we had Judith Sherman from UNICEF, like, oh, that makes me feel good that we're doing that in Malali. But as far as selling the industry, you need somebody selling it, and we're kind of, I think we got a little bit of a vacuum right now.
Yeah. And it's kind of like a hater's gonna hate sort of situation where I think that the drone industry doesn't like picking people up. It's really weird, actually.
Oh man, we got too many haters, man. We got too many haters. We got haters that hate themselves.
Should we name them right now? Should we just list them all out? You know who you
hate shame people.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, like, it's not good for the industry. I think that drone shows, whether it's InterDrone or others, you get about 2,500, 3,000 people interacting about the same technology. In that 3,000 people, we should be getting in a little love circle and hugging each other, because it's all we got. Like, we have to rely on each other to make this thing grow.
Right, think about it. It's only 3,000 people that even want to come, right? And that's any event, right?
I know. And then when you go to like Europe, it's less, significantly less. And it's just because, there's so many barriers. So if this is what we got, if we have a great Swiss guy that works for DJI and we have great Swiss technology, basically we should just focus the entire industry on Switzerland, maybe move InterDrone there. Joke. But what I'm really trying to say is that we need to know these people, right? We need to know who the players are. They need to be public facing so we can get a hold of them. And that goes up to the top, and that nobody is too busy to interact with this industry, because as soon as they unplug themselves from it, their ideas are worse, their customers are less loyal, and we can't risk that. Right now, we cannot have people buying drone technology being like, I don't know if this company is going to be around in 5 years. That has been the problem since the beginning.
You know, and if anybody disagrees with Randall on that point, like, he was able to launch essentially the unmanned leadership forum with over 1,000 people in like what, a month's time, because you built great relationships with people like me of my caliber, you know, and better for sure across the industry. Like literally everybody else on the list. But you know, you were able to get us all into a room just because, like, yeah, I want to talk with those people, and you know, that public face. I think that was a great kind of celebratory moment, and it was also awesome when you did the sequel with all the women. You know, like, you know, we just need more of that spirit, and it does translate to meaningful results. Like, did you spend a dime on that marketing?
Well, I paid my buddy to make the poster and the T-shirt that you're wearing.
Yeah, so we wouldn't waste money on that on InterDrone, but I'm willing to bet our cost per lead is a lot larger because
oh yeah,
you know.
yeah, and so I mean, to that point, the idea of creating a leadership forum was just me being like, I'm going to do this, and nobody can tell me no, you can't do this, right? So I'm going to leverage whatever I've got to create this, you know, this thing. And during COVID, we've seen a lot of new podcasts and new, you know, webinars pop up that you're like, who the hell is this guy? But it's, you know, people are not busy, but they're doing exactly the same thing. They're saying, I have an opportunity to create a platform, and no time more than now in my life has been more important to reach a lot of people with your ideas and try to, like, you know, smooth out this world, not just the drone industry, but we're talking about racial injustice. We're talking about, you know, all the things we're dealing with right now.
Everybody watch Bill and Ted's Face the Music. It'll make you feel good about the world again.
when you can't get face to face with people anymore, and you don't have that emotional connection that InterDrone brings, we have to do it somewhere else, somehow else. And I think it's really great to sit with you guys right now and at least see your faces, and we talk about the industry and talk about the things that I bottle up 99% of my day. So, you know, it used to be you'd have a few trade shows a year. You could go get around everyone and be like, Precision Hawk, taking more money. Oh, Michael Chasen, should he be the keynote speaker? Like we were talking about, me being a hater, that's going to hate as well. Not on Michael Chasen. You're fine. I'm just using you as an example. But it was nice because we were all in the same damn boat. And now that boat is like, you know, it's a stand-up paddleboard, and we're trying to get across.
Boat's getting smaller and the water's getting a little choppier.
Exactly. It's a great analogy, and we just have to go back to building that one solid boat that's going to get us from point A to point B, or we're all going to sink. Another great analogy. Shit.
Yeah. Now we went from aviation to aquatic vehicles. So I know we're coming up on a little over an hour here, but Randall, I want you to just briefly tell us about two of the FLIR products that came out this year. The Hadron, I think Mike's favorite named product that we've talked about all year, and then the FLIR View TZ20. Tell us a little bit about it.
Let me just, I mean, this has been a casual conversation, and I think that it's good for the industry to realize like how we come to certain decisions. So the Hadron was built for the SRR program. All the Blue UAS companies, while they were developing their thing, could have selected the Hadron and not had to build their own payload, or they could have built their own payload with, usually it was the boson sensor that's in the Hadron. If you look at Teal Drone's Golden Eagle, that's the Hadron that's integrated because that was required by the DIU back over those 18 months and before. So the Hadron was something that was kind of developed with a purpose, and now we're just trying to extend that purpose. But I think it's a great product for drone manufacturers that are trying to catch up to the current standards that have been set by these blue UAS companies to get to the same payload capabilities. The View TZ20 is interesting because it's a payload that's designed for DJI airframes, and this goes back to the internal conversations we need to have, which is if we build a payload, how are we going to sell thousands of them?
Right.
Well, there's not 1,000 industrial airframes that carry a payload of that size or weight or whatever that we can address as easily as DJI, and DJI's PSDK is great, and DJI has opened up that environment, so it was a no-brainer to make it. Now, is there risk? Could DJI airframes get banned in our biggest markets tomorrow? Sure. And that's a calculation we have to make.
Right.
But it's you can see that all the points I've been making are real, the impacting real-time decisions that we're making on the product side at FLIR every day. We built a DJI payload and launched it 3 months after they launched their own thermal payload with a Chinese core manufacturer. Why would we do that? Because it's not about competition. They did that they did that for themselves, which is how DJI views the world, but it's not because they don't want partnership. It's not that they don't want people working with their stuff. They just want it all, and we're kind of one of the suckers that play into that game.
Yes, no, it's interesting. But I mean, back to DJI just being kind of like an Android, you wonder if they do limit their kind of future potential by kind of creating the products that all their partners create already, and what those long-term effects really, how that really shakes out. And I have no idea what that looks like down the line. But if you're possibly severing ties with companies that you used to work closely with, or just limiting kind of future use cases or integrations is interesting.
It used to be that I would say what DJI does really well is they know what they're good at. So they don't make a fixed wing, because that's not what the business that they want to be in. They make really good, sleek, small airframes at a certain, iteration, and you could rely on that. But now they're starting to get into the way that consumer drone sales have dropped to the point that they need enterprise to pick up. And they're like, well, if we take thermal that's this many tens of millions a year, and we take multispectral, which is like 15 million a year, and we take photogrammetry, which is like 40 million a year, we can get those numbers back up. But I think it's strange because it just waters down their approach. You mentioned earlier, making niche products doesn't really benefit anyone. Now DJI is doing it. Like, why? It's not worth it. I would say that to anyone that's making those decisions. It's not worth it taking it all on your own. Make the best vehicles. Work out your cybersecurity issues. Get more Brendan Schulmans.
Right.
Do you think we're kind of like at a point where enterprises want more niche products, but what's actually good for the market is not to have them yet? Is to actually
100%.
keep it? Yeah.
100%. I mean, that is what I was talking about. Bob Mader at Union Pacific. He's like, I want to have the ability to pitch and catch a drone. So basically, I'm piloting to a point, and then I can now give control of that drone to the guy with the controller over there. And I want to be able to do that. And DJI is like, huh? Like me at DJI is like, that's like engineering. That's going to take someone to build that. And the use cases for that are small. Not everyone's running a railroad.
That reminds me so much of, like, we've been looking at digital platforms for all our shows across Emerald, and like you'd get these like requests for features, like you're like, why would you even ask for that? Just like, don't try to make everything that's going to happen at a live event happen online, and I bet what he was thinking was like, I want to be able to do that because we currently, through our communication system, that's how the handoff happens.
100%.
Right.
Like, that's what we do with train cars.
Taking the antiquated model and trying to kind of force
like
this new technology into it.
Right. For sure. And so when you're faced up to like, all right, Union Pacific's going to be our customer, they're going to buy 300 units a year, but we're going to build some special features for them. You either choose to invest in something that's going to have less return, or you say, I guess we're not the right company for you. But then they go in a circle, they meet everyone, they realize no one can do it, and then they're right back.
They come back. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So, but then there's also the equation for DJI in that kind of circumstance where you're saying like, well, I've heard this request across multiple industries. Yes, then I will build it.
That is why you have to listen to the people, and that is the problem. I used to be that guy. I would stand at CES for all 4 or 5 days of CES by myself, and basically in a DJI booth talking about enterprise products, not by myself. They had other people. No one cared about enterprise then. And so my voice was sore after hour 4, talking to lines of people that wanted to know about the industrial side of DJI. And I was listening and giving feedback back to engineers. Who do you know left at DJI today? Romeo, Wayne Baker, and Brendan Schulman. That's it. And their voices within the DJI organization have, and I'll speak from my perspective, have lessened. Jan Gasparic, who was a bigger name in DJI Enterprise, who was based in China, spoke fluent Chinese, but it was a Western guy. He's gone, and like that's a huge loss for DJI because they had someone that could communicate on both sides and was really well respected. And more of those people are leaving DJI, and when you can't name 10 people from the largest company in our industry, it becomes a problem. Becomes a big problem.
Well, also, maybe it was because I was there kind of when things started to pick up on the, the small UAS side of things. But like, I remember thinking everybody was a star. Like Mike Wynn from Drone Deploy was a star to me. I remember interviewing in his office, and I was like, "Oh my God, it's Mike Wynn." And now I'm like, "Yeah, Mike Wynn." Yeah,
Mike's dope. Mike's great.
He is, but like, yeah, but my familiarity with him has like, just lessened the kind of star appeal. So I'm only saying that because I'm just saying maybe you're a little jaded now, that because all these people, you expect more,
Yeah, I guess so. But I think for me personally, just like my personality is, I never look at anyone as like their titles or their like positions. I don't really care. I've never really cared about that, and so I go into a conversation like this in the same way if it would have been, not recorded and not on a podcast. It's like we're just gonna have a chat, or like the Unmanned Underground event. Like we're all pals, and I've always seen it that way. And I don't care what you do for your day job. I don't care if you're 10 times wealthier than me or 15 times more desperate. I want to have good conversations with people, and so
I think that energy is important. We need more of the kind of hand holding, and or all of us kind of holding hands in a circle. And as much as that's been said, there still isn't enough of it,
100%, man. And I think that being a part of DJI Airworks this 2 weeks ago, right? We launched our product there, and then I spoke at on a panel. It was last week. Time is going in a weird way right now.
How was it? They had a good show, right?
So first of all, shout out Denise Hibbard for putting together a virtual Airworks that felt as close to an in-person event as you can that I've been to. I've been to a handful of these virtual things.
There's another person. Denise is awesome.
Yeah, Denise is awesome, but
maybe
also
she's more insider though.
Exactly. The facing of public is like putting people in the right direction, but she has enough stuff to worry about rather than standing up and talking about the technology. But Denise is incredible. All the people on the forums that I brought in not always had a public facing position and not always were able to share their insights, but people have so much to share. And so I think that that's really the key to what you do at Emerald and with InterDrone, is that you give someone a voice to the industry to share their insights. And otherwise, how in the hell do you do it? You can't.
Right.
And you just stew on it. And so I think, I've always liked trade shows. I've always liked events. They're exhausting, but I enjoy them. But now being in this COVID environment, you realize that part of the slippage we're experiencing in this industry is that no one can answer the question, what's next? Because to get that information, you have to what?
Yeah.
Read news? I'm not doing that.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing is like it's not disruptive enough. Like I put out a press release. Okay, well, did a writer that day find nothing else that he wanted to write about except for that? Did she commit the time to writing 500, 1200, words to it?
Right.
And how many readers did it get? Did it land with their audience? That's what you're dealing with normally, or buying Google ads or scraping LinkedIn and trying to hit up sales calls, right? All those things are effective and need to be done in a general marketing cycle. But, we do all those things to market the event. But you know what actually makes the event? Everybody that comes to participate.
100%.
So the fact that you get more brands in the circle, the fact that we got all of the top leading speakers and we gave them more time in a better format, that's what brings people to the event. So you can't get that splash without bringing everybody together. Because you know what? Even when Intel was part of the conversation, they couldn't do that on their own. So that's just a fact of life.
And the buzz of the industry has gone away in a lot because you can't hear the buzz anymore. You walk onto a trade show floor and you ask those questions and you hear the same thing over and over. People are excited about a certain product. They're getting a lot of people to congregate around their booth or whatever it is. That's how your brain makes decisions. You're like, I recognize there's something special going on. I recognize there's a change, a shift. You can't really recognize it behind a computer screen, especially when you're not seeing faces and you're not interacting.
The energy is not the same at all, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't stick with you the same way.
Definitely. I mean, hell, we all put on like podcasts in the background just to feel like we're part of a conversation.
Right. But I'm not watching all of them.
I even speak back to them sometimes.
Yeah, I'm like, you're totally wrong.
Yeah. I miss you guys. I miss what you guys do. I truly do. And I know right now, December, is that like still on the table or is that not?
Yeah, it's still officially on the table, but we'll be coming out with some news about digital soon, I believe.
Okay.
So regardless of what form the event takes, there's going to be a digital component, and we've invested a lot of time in making that the best one that we could choose, and I think everybody will be impressed by the price too.
Don't know if it's weird, but definitely as you're trying to put together the virtual event, talk to Denise because she did a hell of a job, and I don't know if it was them putting a ton of money behind it or if it was just grind, but
I don't know if we can do that for anti-competitive reasons.
Best practices is all I'm saying is that they had some, and if you're able to check that out, I mean, whatever.
If they want to post publicly about it, that's perfectly fine.
For sure. But I do miss the events. I do miss getting with the industry. I think that these conversations get me riled up because I just don't get to, express a lot. And I think that everyone's feeling that way. We all care about the jobs we have and the industry we're trying to build. It's at this lull and we're just trying to push this rock up a mountain, but we need to all get behind it. And it's hard to kind of make a collective voice when we're not in the collective space.
It's true, but I think that kind of feeling of COVID and just the lack of connection that just has come with that. I think there's been great headlines and progress made this year. It looks like regulation will be actually creeping forward. We're never going to get everything we want out of it, but like just the fact that we're getting things on the books finally, I think that makes a difference. And, the Amazon Part 135 thing. Yeah, it's just another kind of rehash of the same feeling, I guess. But it's so important that we keep those things happening. Yeah, so those things have happened. They just don't feel as impactful because of everything else going on this year. And to your point, the transmission medium, it's just a press release that ends up on CNN for the people that actually make this industry move. Yeah. That's nothing. In fact, there's been a lot of press releases that made it to CNN that people in the industry go, well, that'll never happen. So good, you got your headline today, Yeah. But
I'm going to say something stupid, and it's maybe my parting thoughts. Is
get ready to cut this.
I resisted having a LinkedIn for a long, long, long time, and I have one now, and it's thriving. I have people that I follow on there, and it's where I get a lot of the news or a lot of that buzz that's missing from trade shows right now in COVID. Is I see someone reiterating the same thing or iterating something that someone else said about great drone technology or something like that. And so for anyone listening that second guesses whether they should post something because they don't get enough people clicking like on it, it really matters. It contributes to the collective voice. It contributes to the way that we're thinking about the industry. And just because someone didn't take a second to like it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And that's one place that I actually feel voices right now with the drone industry.
And that's so true, especially so like I follow a whole bunch of people on Twitter. That's where I get my news that I bother CJ at 4 a.m. about. But the thing about LinkedIn is your network's going to be relatively small, right? But those people should matter to your actual business. So how many people do you have to get on Twitter as far as followers, let's say, to get a like? Probably like 500 to get started, really 10,000 to make a difference, where you're consistently getting likes on everything you post. The truth is most people on social media, they're observing, they're they're looking, they'll click through on the link, or even they'll absorb the headline and then they'll talk to somebody and say, did you hear about X? Yeah, your voice does matter, so please use it to get the word out about what's going on in the industry. And maybe I could use that advice myself and talk a little bit more.
For sure. I mean, people look to you guys to guide that, and I think that you see a lot of things posted for InterDrone, but InterDrone isn't a person, and I think that sometimes that person that you trust and that you know that has no ulterior motive, that just sharing insights, like that's who you want to hear from the most.
Like Brendan Torres, Declet, right? So like you had him on, right? So I actually got introduced to him on Twitter because he called our show out for being right during vacation time, right? And he says, I forget what happened, but like I ended up just talking with him, like, yeah, hey, I'll talk with you about why we made that decision. Like, I know it sucks, but we made that decision because we used to be on Labor Day, and that was even worse actually for traveling with kids because you had to get them back for school. So, after talking with him, I brought him to my side. That's how much it matters to communicate. You could turn somebody who is completely, InterDrone to Brendan before that moment. I mean, it's been 5 years. God knows why we didn't talk to him person to person, especially since he's from Measure. But it just never happened, right? But that person to person communication, even if he never invests in my show, like his feelings about my show and me, I mean, he's now an advocate, and that won't change ever again. So that's the meaning behind person to person connection. It adds up in ways that you can never overestimate.
In this industry too, it's just so easy. It's easy to meet people. People are passionate about drones, passionate about aviation. They're very open to kind of creating those relationships. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think CJ, we never really. I don't know if we've met before today,
No,
but
no,
it's like you create this like circle of homies, and I'm not saying homies is being male or female or whatever age. It
generic.
doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it's all just
agnostic.
like a circle of homies. And now when you need something, when I did the Unmanned Underground thing the first time, it was just hit up homies, hit up Brandon, hit up Chris, hit up Mike, and we just bring them all together and let's talk. And then the second iteration was bring a bunch of female homies together, and not all of them had been in that position where they could talk publicly about their insights, and I think most of them valued that. And it's bringing Wingtra in the same room as DJI, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think that was kind of like the behind the scenes, the motions I felt about putting something together like that. Is this was a culmination of me saying yes to things, sitting with pals, sharing real stuff instead of being like, oh, I don't really, talk about that, or not feeling like I was allowed to say my opinions. Some people do feel like they're not trying to sound stupid, and I've just always recklessly sounded stupid as much as possible. And I think that's part of the human, like my secret sauce is like every conversation is a human conversation. It's not a corporate conversation. I'm not protecting my brand. If my CEO calls or my boss calls me tomorrow and says the CEO heard this and you were saying some weird stuff and we don't want you representing the brand, I'd say fine, you got the wrong guy. And I think that's kind of like,
stop cashing the checks then, I'll be out.
honestly though, and it's what's worked for me is that people know that if I'm sitting on a podcast, I'm gonna say what I think, and it might not be the most vanilla stuff that comes out of my mouth, but maybe it's good for promoting conversation, and I've always liked to think of myself as that guy.
Yeah, no, I mean, we really appreciate you just sharing these candid thoughts and having this kind of transparent dialogue with us
For sure.
with us today.